During one of the recent installments of my top 20 best bodybuilder series, a claim was made that Samson Dauda in his 2024 Olympia physique is one of the top 10 best physiques to ever hit a bodybuilding stage.
Xavier just said something utterly baffling to me, and I just want to make sure I understand.
I've heard other people say it on other podcasts. I'm not the only one who thinks that Samson is like
Samson
behind.
Dauda's 2024 Olympia physique is a top 10 physique of all time. Like, for the purposes of this video, best version versus best version.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those that watch that episode of the series know that I was pretty incredulous on that claim. If Samson is really a top 10 physique of all time with that package at the 2024 Mr. Olympia, then really all of the other bodybuilders behind him, legends of the sport too, by anyone's estimation, just plain suck. I think Samson is most definitely within the top 20 of all time, and he's closer to 10 than he is to 20 for sure, but anything more than 10th to me just seems too outlandish to believe. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not giving Samson enough credit. There's only one way to find out. I'm going to keep doing that series and also throw in some matchups with some of the greats for our current Mr. Olympia. Now, for the purposes of the top 20 list, it doesn't have anything to do with legacy or how many wins a bodybuilder has. It's about peak version versus peak version. When I put Phil's 2011 version as the second best physique of all time, what I'm saying is that 2011 Phil beats everyone's peak version ever except one other person's. And if I did put Samson top 10 on that list, that means his best version is capable of beating everyone ever to walk on a bodybuilding stage, aside from 9 other versions of other physiques. With this being the main focus of the list, that being peak version to peak version, I think Dennis Wolf, for the purposes of this list, is a legit top 10 contender for it. If Samson wants to be top 10 on our list, he'll definitely have to go through the best Dennis Wolf and vice versa. So today we're going to compare the 2024 Olympia version of Samson Dauda versus the best version of Dennis Wolf, which was him at the 2013 Mr. Olympia where he took 3rd place. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into today's heavyweight matchup. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. Alright, now I pretty much have already showed my hand a little too much on this one. While I may not have a straight up bias towards or against Samson, I really do like his physique, I do recognize that to me, the claim that he's a top 10 physique of all time is very dubious to say the least. So I do have a motive here to prove that Samson is not top 10, but like I do in every one of my comparisons, I'm going to try and remove my bias here as much as possible. Like always, I'm just going to tell you what I see as we go through these shots, and I'll tell you my overall thoughts at the end. Anyway, in the first pose, we can see exactly why I wanted to compare Dennis to Samson of all people. Say what you will about Dennis and his flaws, and we'll unpack a lot of those, and Samson is no saint either, but for the purposes of just pure raw bodybuilding, which mainly comes down to winning more mandatories, Dennis is just built for it. You can see some of his smaller issues here, and yeah, he doesn't exactly flow as well as Samson, but I still have Dennis taking our first shot. He just wins more areas of the pose. Starting from the ground up, yes, the calves aren't that good, but Samson's are just okay. So for this being one of Dennis's main critiques, Samson really can't take that much advantage of it. But then in the quads, that's Dennis all day. He's far more developed, maybe even a little too developed, as he's a little bottom heavy in my eyes, but his upper half is nuts too. But staying on the quads just for a sec, Dennis's sweeps beat Samson's and the separation is far better. Going up a little further, one of Samson's strong points is his waistline, and it looks great. However, while Dennis doesn't have a vacuum, his waist is just about as small as Samson's. So Samson may be a slight winner here, but Dennis is no loser. However, sure, Samson barely wins the waist, but in terms of the overall torso, you have to go with Dennis. His lats are 3 times more present in this pose than Samson's, and the waist is just as small. But that brings us to the most contentious part of the pose, the arms. And this is a little tricky, mainly just because of Dennis's asymmetry. I really do like a symmetrical set of arms, but Samson's just aren't that good. They're flat and lack separation. I mean, Dennis's weak arm is actually on par, if not just a little worse than both of Samson's arms. My problem is the fact that Dennis also has a good arm, which is great, but it makes his smaller arm look really out of place. If he just had 2 left arms, this would be a solid win, but now I'm just 50-50. Overall, small win in the arms or not for either guy, it's not enough to sway my opinion on this one. I still have Dennis. Samson does have the better flow, as I said earlier. His physique overall just comes together a bit more evenly and aesthetically, but really, there's a case for Dennis. I mean, if we're just talking about the X-ray proportions, it's certainly Dennis's win with pretty much the same waistline as Samson, but much better and wider lats and legs. Overall, Dennis was just more impressive to me. He looked to be bigger, wider, while also managing to carry a good level of separation. To me personally, that constitutes a solid win, which in my scoring system would mean 3 points. I usually march in a victory system where the winner of the pose or category gets 2, 3, or 4 points depending on how big their win is. And I think this is a fairly solid Dennis win, but hey, maybe that's just my bias coming out. So I'll be conservative and just make it a 2-point win for Samson. I get that he looks better, but this isn't classic. Not to mention, Dennis literally has the more exaggerated proportions on top of the better details and body parts. It's kind of more of the same in the front lat spread. Nowadays, Samson schools a lot of the short guys running around, but put him next to a bigger guy like Dennis, and now Samson can't coast off his structure anymore. In fact, Dennis wins in that regard once again. Samson does have a slightly better flow to his pose, but Dennis takes wins in everything. He wins the legs, although Samson is incredibly strong here. The chest on Dennis is detailed, but a bit fuller than Samson, so he wins there as well. And the arms and delts are pretty close, but once again, I have Dennis for a little more separation, but Samson is fuller, so there's that. And finally, in the lats, while close too, Dennis still wins. Now to touch on the debate we did in the last pose, we can say that Samson's shape and flow are better, but really what does that even mean? Sure, the pose looks nicer, but Dennis's X-frame is just as good as Samson's, if not actually a bit more exaggerated like it was in the front double. So yeah, I want to say Samson's pose looks better, but that's not a hill I'm willing to die on. The X-frame is honestly the most important aspects in regards to overall aesthetics, especially for the open class. So with it being so close and then Dennis winning everything else, there's once again a case for 3 points, I feel. I think that still is being a bit heavy-handed though, so I'll once again just stick with 2 points for Dennis. Samson is very strong here, great X-frame, lats, legs, and shape, but Dennis is just better in a lot of things. Probably stronger than you remember. Although we've yet to use anything but a 2-point margin, here we actually have our closest pose so far. These guys were some of the best in the side chest in their respective eras because they're tall guys with wide structures, but they actually fill those structures in. Really, I can go either way on this one, but for a different reason for each. As it stands now, my preference is Dennis. Samson does win the chest with a little more thickness, but to be fair, Dennis has more detail with great thickness himself. The posing on Samson also allows him to look wider and makes the pecs look even thicker because he's propping them up. Dennis should have been doing a little more of the same, to be honest. But after the pecs, I think Dennis takes the majority of the different pieces and is overall more complete. His arm and delt aren't blurry like Samson, so he takes that area. The midsection is tight, but I do prefer Samson keeping those abs really flexed, but Dennis finishes the pose with a strong win in the side leg. Samson is a bit drier, but Dennis is the one with the glute feathers, and he also has more hamstring drop, which leads to more overall size. So sure, Dennis didn't win the pecs, but top to bottom, I like the overall package more. Samson is certainly close enough to win off of his win in the pecs, but to each their own. We have some pretty tough poses back to back, pun not intended. I know Dennis gets a bad rap for his back. For most of the years, it was pretty lackluster. However, Dennis is putting up quite the fight here, believe it or not. Now, the biggest criticism about his back was always the lats. From the rear, you could really see how non-existent they were most of the time, and to be honest, they're not that good here either, although this is his best year. However, I just don't think it's as big of a deal with this version and for his opponent today. Yeah, Samson's back is pretty good at this point, but it's not a back that can just steamroll anyone, especially someone like Dennis. Honestly, I think the back pretty much comes down to some kind of personal preference. I mean, can you reconcile the fact that Dennis's back is not as pretty and symmetrical in exchange for the better qualities? That's the main question this pose comes down to. From the traps all the way down to the lower back, Dennis has more detail, but Samson's back is really 3D and popping, which helps in this regard. And of course, let's get this straight, Samson does win in the lats, but I wouldn't say it's something to write home about. But at least they're there. But Dennis then turns around and takes the upper back on thickness, detail, and width. He even wins the arms and delts. Again, I think there's a lot to like about Dennis as far as the back and the entire upper half is concerned, but I get that the back looks a little mangled. In the lower half, we really don't get a solid answer either. Samson is overall drier than Dennis, but I just wish there was more going on. Dennis has these really thick hamstrings that are very detailed, and Samson doesn't have anything that sticks out. Yeah, he's drier, but he still doesn't have lines in the glutes. So I think Dennis gets off pretty easy here for having a soggier donk. Even for Dennis having pretty bad calves, I don't think Samson's win here is as big as it could be. He's not taking full advantage of Dennis's shortcomings here or anywhere. Overall, for a personal winner, I have Dennis. I'm one of those guys that can look at Dennis's back, see the good, and reward it. I also like his lower half more, which helps in his case. But I know that's not going to be the popular answer, and I'm fine to go ahead and indulge you. I'll give this to Samson. I think there's a case for him anyway, a good one too, so I'll try to be a bit more objective and give him the small win instead of Dennis. For having no lats, Dennis does surprisingly well in both of the lat spreads, including the rear one. The back is close like in the last shot, but Dennis is a lot better here at masking his flaws for this pose. And since it's less revealing, we're just left with him having the superior qualities once again. On a real stage, he's going to be just as wide as Samson, that's for certain, but here, and to my estimation, I think he'd actually be a bit wider. Not only that, but his back looks just a touch more detailed than Samson's. But Samson is once again rounder, which not only helps in the thickness department, but detail too, which just really pops out at you. The only thing I don't like about about Dennis's back is the skin fold in the bottom, but he's not exactly going against someone with perfect condition. And then in the lower body, I think Samson always looks worse here out of the two back poses. Probably because, again, nothing sticks out. And the back is really wide and impressive, so it makes the lower body look even more lackluster. I prefer Dennis again, just for the hamstrings, but even the quad sweeps look better. Overall, it makes the better X-frame for him. Samson looks more like a Y this time around. Coming out of these poses, I think they're closer than we all thought, and I have to give Dennis at least one of them, if not both. I think he is just legitimately beating Samson here though. Better top to bottom completeness again, and the better overall X-frame too, perhaps even the better back standalone, especially for this pose. Even if you want to say Samson's back is slightly better, I would still say Dennis's overall pose is better. Like the side chest, the side tricep is a pretty close shot. A lot of the times I've been able to overlook Dennis's lack of flow and his smaller issues, but here, not so much. Now mind you, Dennis really doesn't have anything majorly wrong, but the pose just comes together a lot more neatly on Samson's side. I suppose the midsection is the most major thing on Dennis. He still has a locked in stomach, but the abs are a bit messy. Samson has roughly the same sized core, but some more bubbly abs on top of it. Samson also takes a win in the chest. He really maintains his thickness here, and he takes a win in the tricep. It's not the most separated, but Dennis doesn't have good mass here and even worse separation. The side leg is pretty debatable. Dennis has some crazy hamstring drop, but he's not that dry compared to Samson, but Samson's separation is fairly shallow. Overall in this shot, I'd still probably go with Samson though. So all in all, this is a case where Dennis doesn't really have anything to stand out besides overall size. He still looks pretty good, but he doesn't have the freak factor of some of his other shots. He has some smaller issues too, like most of his other shots, but without those great counterpoints to balance it out, this isn't a winning equation. The overall frame and size are very good, but he's missing those highlights which Samson has this time around, so he's going to take a small win. And now for perhaps the most controversial call, but let me explain. In the abs and thighs, I have to go with Dennis reluctantly. Yes, Dennis as a whole has some issues and a lot of them are visible here, but the actual pose does enough to get the job done against low-def Dauda. Overall, they're both mediocre, but Samson even more so. In the abs, I do like Samson a little bit more. They're a bit more bubbly and just look better, but Dennis's are technically pretty good. I do not like the look, let's get that straight. The ab split is rough, but he has some pretty shredded abs. He actually has the smaller waist and better taper too, even the sharper obliques. So he does have some things going for him up top, but it's certainly not pretty. Dennis does enough that Samson doesn't run away with it, despite Dennis's shortcomings. But in the quads, Dennis is running away with it. Samson has no separation here because he's not truly shredded. Head on, he can pose them hard enough to wring out some good detail here, and he is dry, but this angle just shows that his actual condition and separation levels just aren't that good. From most angles, his quads are just alright, and here they're pretty smooth. Dennis is not only massive, but he has the separation to go along with it. Dennis may have lost the abs, but he still had some good qualities. Here, Samson doesn't even pose a real threat. So once again, accounting for both main elements of the pose, top to bottom, I have to go with Dennis. I'm not going to choose slightly better abs and completely forfeit the quads. Dennis's midsection has strong qualities and the quads easily dispatch Samson's. Dennis just has the better average. I'm not pleased to do this. I wouldn't even call this one a biased decision like maybe some of my other calls have been in this matchup. Here, I don't like Dennis, but objectively, he has more going for him than Samson. We're ending off this comparison with some great most musculars and two variations to examine. Now disclaimer, this is a 2007 pick for Dennis. I used this because I couldn't find a good pick of a hands clasp shot compared to Samson's. I figured though that it really isn't that much of an advantage. Dennis did have two great years, those being 2013 and 2007, but obviously he was smaller in 2007, so it is a slight handicap. Anyway, between these two variations, I have Samson, but not by the craziest margin. Overall, he looks a bit more seasoned, and no, that's not a black joke. He just has more of that slightly mature, denser looking physique, which I guess is to be expected against the slightly younger version of Dennis. Dennis would have compared a bit better if we were actually using a 2013 pick, but here he still stacks up fairly well in a few areas. On real stage, Dennis probably takes the quads, younger version or not, but Samson cleans up upstairs with smaller wins in the chest, delts, and arms. Dennis looks pretty good overall, very full, very muscular, very wide, but Samson has that extra level of polish and completeness here. But we get a switch up in the crab variation. Samson is now the one looking unrefined and unpolished. The delts and arms are sus, he has a gut, and pretty poor detail overall, especially next to this version of Dennis since we're back to using the 2013 version. Dennis takes the delts off sheer detail and not having lumps in the medial delts, and even though Dennis's arms are a bit flatter, I don't question them like I do Samson's. And Dennis has the better separation. The chest might still go to Samson, but meh, I think the gut is more impressive. It steals the show here. Dennis's abs aren't pretty, but at least he can keep the midsection locked in, and he wins in the quads as well. Dennis did lose the last variation, but I think he was holding it together a lot better than Samson does here. I just don't think Samson's crab shot is that good, except for the fact that he's overall pretty big. And to be honest, I don't even think this photo does Dennis proper justice, not even close. Now, I just wanted to provide a little more context and really show how good Dennis can look. Again, I just don't think either photo did proper justice to him. This is Dennis in 2007, by the way, but the point is, his crab shot is one of the best, most musculars of all time. Take a look at him next to Ronnie. Yes, this was Ronnie's last Olympia, and no, it wasn't that good of a showing. But even then, I don't feel like Dennis should be beating him by that much, but he is. It's like a repeat of Marcus Rule versus Ronnie. And I mean, that right photo is just jaw-dropping. That pose would lack a little bit of that seasoning we were talking about if we were to put him next to Samson, but I think he could be either of Samson's variations with this. This is legit a top 10 most muscular pose of all time. And I think it does beat either variation of Samson's, and I'm fully comfortable giving this shot to Dennis because of that. I am more than impressed, and this is the one shot you can win off of sheer arbitrary impressiveness. So for our final pose, I think with a fair shake and better picks, Dennis does well enough to win with 2 points. Next, we have the second round of judging, which I think is very important for a matchup like this. I said earlier Dennis would be great in the mandatories, and that he was. Right now he's leading. However, he has some flaws and some gaps. This is why we have the second round of judging in the first place. Some flaws are hidden in poses but still need to be accounted for. Certain physiques are going to be favored or hurt by the presence of either category, and that's why there's both. One hyper-focused on individual poses, and one accounting for overall criteria. And speaking of, this round consists of what I call the 4 overall physique categories, which are overall shape, muscularity, condition, and flaws. Let's start with muscularity. Both of these guys have huge and wide structures and really fill them out. I honestly think Dennis's frame is just a bit more impressive, not only because he's a little wider to my estimation, but I think he was also doing a bit better with per inch muscularity at this point in his career. I think he was slightly bigger in most areas, but what really sealed this category for him was the overall freak factor. I get that that term is kind of arbitrary, but at the same time, I doubt many of you will disagree that Dennis is freakier than Samson, and I really want to account for that, and the best way to do it is a small win in this category. After all, I think freak factor does come from his legitimate but pretty small wins in structure and per inch muscularity. Moving on to condition, from a personal perspective, I'd be perfectly fine with a tie. Dennis had the better separation, but Samson was drier overall. I'm going to forego a tie though to try and prove a point later on. I'm actually going to lean into Samson's direction here, as I think he would be the more popular choice. So 2 points for Samson. Next we have a tricky one, at least to me, which means it's time to discuss shape. For an open bodybuilding context, the thing I care most about is what's most objective. The trouble is, shape is very subjective, so I often mainly just look for who has the better X-frame. Well, in terms of the pure proportions of the X-frame, Dennis was a little better, but Samson's X-frame is also quite good, no doubt about that. However, I would say he does slightly win those more subjective things too, like overall flow and balance to the physique. For my own personal taste, I think because Dennis has a superior X-frame, he's just as good as Samson in the regard of shape for open bodybuilding, but I can and still will acknowledge that Samson's physique just comes together a little bit better. It's not a large win for him though. I definitely don't think it should be. Dennis has the wide shoulders and lats and the crazy quad sweep, and yes, he has the small waist. Samson takes 2 points, but really that's all that's justified. Dennis's proportions are that good. And finally, we have flaws. Let's just be straight up, this is why Dennis has gotten kind of a bad rap. He has no calves, the abs are not the cleanest, there was an asymmetry in the biceps, and he had high lats. What's crazy though is the fact that he was pretty much able to work past every one of these issues when in an isolated pose. Sometimes they all culminated and he lost a shot because of them, but all in all, the pros outweighed the cons most of the time. Still though, when we examine the whole physiques, these things do add up. Some people are going to look at Dennis and only notice the holes, and I can't entirely blame them. I personally don't think the issues are that bad, especially because he has plenty of strengths to outweigh them, but flaws are flaws. I do want to say though, Samson is no saint. He has some issues too, albeit smaller ones. The delts are sus. They can go from very smooth with no detail at times to a little pointy. The stomach is also a slight issue at times, but he can remedy that one pretty easily with a vacuum. But overall, even if you're a Dennis hater, I don't think you can give Samson a perfect score in this category. He has issues of his own. To be honest, I don't even think 3 points is warranted, but I'll do it anyway. Just because I can get over Dennis's flaws pretty easily doesn't make it the most objective choice, and in the case of Dennis's flaws, I'd definitely rather be heavy-handed here with punishing him because of his reputation is that of a pretty flawed physique. Regardless of how you saw this comparison, I think we can all agree that it was close. That may come as a surprise to some, but to others maybe not. The final scores were just about as close as you can get. Winning this comparison with 52.2 points was Dennis Wolf, leaving Samson with 47.8 points. Honestly, not to blow smoke up my own ass, but I really think that the scoring system I designed came in clutch here. It performed exactly how it's intended to. As you can see, Dennis did very well in the mandatories, while on the other side of that, Samson did extremely well in the overall physique categories. And since they split the rounds of judging like that, of course they had a very close scores, but they got to those totals by completely different means. But that makes sense. Dennis has this physique that has these crazy pros to it, but also some noticeable cons. And the pluses to his physique usually culminate to deliver some pretty knockout shots, a lot of which Samson was not even able to withstand. Samson is better at looking more evenly developed. He doesn't have anything as glaring as some of Dennis's issues, but nothing that really stands out like some of Dennis's attributes. But they also have things they do very similarly, like having these huge structures that are very filled out and still very proportional. And again, with each guy taking a big win in either round of judging, it came down to basically a 50-50. And I pretty much believe it is. Even right now, I almost want to switch my answer to Samson. It comes down to pretty much one question, and it's not even necessarily about the bodybuilders in front of us, it's about how we or you view judging. The question is, do you want more freak factor and the better physique for bodybuilding, or the more put together, more aesthetic physique? There isn't a wrong choice, especially because these guys are so split. There are compelling arguments for both. Dennis is going to appeal to that more hardcore audience, and Samson will appeal to an audience with a more classical, aesthetics-focused preference. Me personally, I fall into that first camp. Dennis did win the more important category, that being the mandatory poses round, and that's the main reason I have him taking this comparison. I think winning the mandatories, or the more objective things, should always be considered more seriously than the subjective factors. With that said though, while Dennis did win a lot of poses, Samson was very close with him in almost every single one of them. But I could say the same thing about these guys in the overall physique categories. And it's not just the poses, Dennis also had the more exaggerated proportions, even though he was next to Samson of all people. And Dennis had insane freak factor too, again, even next to a 300-pound bodybuilder. And oftentimes Dennis's separation was better. The condition may not have been overall better, but the level of separation was better on Dennis most of the time. Overall, he wins the more objective things, and that amounts to what I think is the more objective outcome of this comparison. I would not mind having Samson winning, but purely winning off of better flow seems a little too arbitrary for me. I think perhaps the biggest argument for Samson would be the fact that he has less flaws, but is also pretty similar to Dennis, similar enough to win off of having less flaws. We are talking about a nail-biter comparison, so certainly we aren't dealing in absolutes, but Dennis Wolf is my winner of today's comparison for those more compelling arguments, as small as they may be. I did want to include one additional piece of evidence, or really just some food for thought. What about the actual placing in these guys' respective shows? Some of you will be saying, well, Samson won the Olympia and Dennis only ever placed top 3. Well, yes, that is true, but really that puts them in the exact same place as far as I'm concerned. Samson won the Olympia, okay, but Dennis was only beat by 2 other people, those being perhaps the best versions ever of Kai Green and Phil Heath. And to be honest, I went back and looked at some of those call-out photos, and I have to say Dennis is extremely impressive. In fact, according to the scorecard, one judge actually had him placing second, and he most certainly wins some shots, but he's not going to beat those guys, and he didn't. But it's safe to say Samson wouldn't either. But how well would Samson have done at this event? Well, honestly, probably somewhere around Dennis. Samson has a lot of the same tools, so while you may not expect it, I think Samson could have been as high as 3rd at the 2013 Mr. Olympia. I think he would have maybe a slightly worse time getting over Jay, Dexter, and Sean, but I'd still have them all losing to Samson at least 95% of the time. That leaves Dennis and Samson as they were here, battling it out in a close contest with only Kai and Phil placing ahead of them, which means if you took those 2 guys out, either Samson or Dennis would have easily been the 2013 Mr. Olympia, which is pretty eye-opening. Honestly, even though Samson didn't win this comparison in my eyes, I still want to say I think this adds a lot of credibility to Xavier's claim. I think Samson probably is top 10. We'll have to wait for the final list, of course, but I wouldn't be surprised if both of these guys end up in that top 10, with Dennis perhaps just being slightly above Samson, at least in my opinion, but I'll probably be outvoted on the panel, but that's okay. That's why we have a panel in the first place, and honestly, I wouldn't be upset if Samson placed a little ahead of Dennis. I think they'll pretty much be side by side anyway. And after running through this matchup, I can say it's close. Honestly, if this series and creating this list has taught me anything, it's that a lot of bodybuilders are fantastically overrated. I mean, I was here thinking guys like Nasser, Kevin, and Chris are going to fill the top 10, but really, thinking about it now, I don't know if a single one of them will even make the top 10 cut. Both of these guys in this matchup today, and a lot of other modern guys, are easily going to place above just about all of those 90s legends. All those guys that people seem to put on a pedestal. I underrated Samson, no doubt, but everyone seems to overrate a crazy amount of bodybuilders when in reality both Samson and Dennis could rack up a ton of wins against all of those guys. And maybe Dennis would do just a little bit better. Maybe. Okay, well, on the surface, this video aged poorly. If you haven't seen yet, we already did the overall final tier list, and even I wanted to rank Dennis in a tier below Samson. So I thought, great, I'm going to have to redo this entire video because it doesn't reflect my opinion anymore. Well, then I went back and looked at this video, and to be honest, I don't really know what I could change. I guess I could change my opinion on one of these poses, and because it was already so close, that would technically be enough to change the win to a small Samson one. However, I don't think that really changes the narrative from what it already was. I already said it was close in this video. Not only that, but I said I would be fine with a Samson win. Dennis barely won in this matchup, but if Samson barely won, I think that's pretty much still in the wheelhouse of my overall conclusion, which was that this matchup was actually very close. They both easily won one of the rounds of judging, so we had a stark divide here. And even going back now after doing the tier list, when I actually examined these two guys one-on-one, I actually haven't changed my mind. So what happened? Well, I said this at the end of the final tier list video, but even though this is a top 20 list, and 20 is a lot of guys for anyone but your mother, and even though we did break it down into tiers, the reality is that pretty much all the guys within the top 20, outside of like the top 6, are still very competitive with each other. Bodybuilding is a game of inches, pun not intended. But within the top 20 of all time, you can and probably will debate every single placing we end up coming up with. And I'll struggle with the finalists too in my own mind, even though I'm going to be the one that makes it. That's because these guys are so good and able to remain competitive with each other, even though one guy might be 8th and the other 18th. Also, I wanted to know, I think I put Dennis in the 11th through 15th tier, and I put Samson within the 6th through 10th tier. Well, in my mind, Dennis is on the front end of his tier and Samson's toward the middle of his, so I'd still have them very close on my list. If anything, I think I underrated Dennis yet again. But the fact is that he does have some flaws, yes, but he has some great shots on an enormous frame with tons of freak factor. He can and will be competitive with just about anyone on this list because he's one of the biggest guys on it. Anyway, I just wanted to try to explain why I seem to have conflicting answers on the stream compared to here in this video, and the truth is, I just do. One-on-one, I can't really argue too much with what I had today in this video, but I still want to place Samson higher on the tier list. I don't know, it's pretty weird. It was legitimately a close matchup, basically a 50-50, and I think this proves it. I can't even make up my mind. Well, I did, but I made it up pretty soundly on both sides of the aisle on separate videos because I can really see both sides to this. To make a long story short and to wrap this up, this is really close. Samson will probably be higher on the list, but one-on-one, I could have Dennis winning and did in this video. Do I disagree? Not really, but we'll see which opinion ultimately prevails on the final list. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. Who did you guys have winning this matchup, and do you think either of these physiques are worthy of being called top 10 of all time? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you guys like this video and want to see the conclusion to the series coming up very soon, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And if you guys want to get your hands on some high quality supplements while supporting my channel even further, head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, be sure to use my code Project10 to get 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 on armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.